My name is Sophia Bennett, and I'm 33 years old. I was 7 years old the day my mother decided to turn my life into a punchline. It was a Tuesday in October, I remember, because I was wearing my favorite red jacket with the yellow buttons, the one my grandmother had gifted me the previous Christmas. We were at Millfield Central Station, a busy transit hub about 40 minutes from our house in the suburbs. My mother had told me we were going to visit Aunt Carol. I had been excited all morning, bouncing in the back seat, singing along to whatever was playing on the radio. My father was driving. My older brother, Daniel, was sitting beside me, already 14 and already too cool to acknowledge my existence most days. I had no idea that the four of us would not be returning home together. The station was loud and overwhelming the way only public spaces can be when you are small. Pigeons scattered across the concrete floor. Announcements echoed off the high ceiling in that hollow, distorted way that always made words impossible to understand. My mother held my hand as we walked in from the parking lot. She bought herself a coffee from the kiosk near the entrance. She pointed at the big arrivals board and asked me to read the city names out loud, which I did proudly because I had just learned to read properly that year. She told me I was so smart. She smiled at me with that wide, warm smile I had trusted completely my entire short life. Then she said she needed to use the restroom and would be right back. She never came back. I stood beside a bench near platform 3 for what felt like an eternity. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I watched people rush past with rolling suitcases. A woman bumped into me without apologizing. A man in a conductor's uniform glanced at me once but kept walking. I told myself she was just taking long. I told myself maybe the line was long. I told myself every single comforting thing a 7-year-old brain could manufacture to avoid the one truth that was slowly, coldly rising up through my chest like ice water. She was gone. I walked to the restroom entrance and asked a woman coming out if she had seen my mommy. The woman looked around, said no, and kept moving. I went back to the bench. I sat. I waited. I pressed my knees together and folded my hands in my lap the way my teacher had taught us to sit during assembly, as if good posture could somehow hold the panic at bay. What I did not know, what I would only learn years later, was that my mother had walked straight back to the car where my father and Daniel were waiting. She had laughed. She had said, "Let's see if she can find her way home." My father had apparently hesitated, or so he would claim later, but then he drove away. My brother said nothing. The three of them went to a diner 2 miles from the station and ordered lunch. My father had a burger. My mother had a chicken sandwich. Daniel had fries. I know this because Daniel told me himself, 16 years later, after too many drinks at a family barbecue, as if confessing it somehow absolved him of sitting in that booth and eating French fries while his 7-year-old sister sat alone in a train station. They had placed a bet. My mother told my father she gave me 40 minutes before I started crying to a stranger. My father said I would find a phone and call the house. My brother, apparently, said nothing. He just ate his fries. I sat on that bench for 2 hours and 19 minutes. I know the exact time because a kind elderly man named Gerald, who was waiting for his daughter's train, eventually sat beside me, noticed I had been crying silently, and asked me where my parents were. I told him I did not know. He stayed with me until a station officer came. The officer took me to a small room behind the ticket counter that smelled like coffee and printer ink. A woman with short gray hair gave me a juice box and asked me my address. I gave it to her. I knew my address by heart because my mother had drilled it into me since I was 4. My mother had made sure I knew how to get home. She just never intended to take me there herself. 20 years is a long time to disappear. Not disappear the way people imagine when they hear that word. No dramatic running, no forged identity, no life lived in shadows. I simply never went back. After that day at Millfield Central Station, I was placed temporarily with a neighbor family while child services sorted through the paperwork. My parents came to collect me that same evening, full of laughter, calling it a harmless prank, telling the social worker it had been a misunderstanding, that they had only been gone a few minutes. The social worker looked at them the way people look at something they cannot quite believe is real. She looked at me. I looked at the floor. Nothing happened to them. No charges, no formal warnings, nothing that left a mark on paper. They took me home. My mother made spaghetti for dinner, and the whole thing was simply folded away like it had never occurred. But something had shifted inside me that afternoon on that bench, something so fundamental that no amount of spaghetti could ever reach it. I had learned, at 7 years old, with complete and permanent clarity, that the people who were supposed to protect me found my fear entertaining. That knowledge does not leave you. It settles into the foundation of who you are, and everything you build afterwards sits on top of it, slightly crooked, always compensating. I left for college at 18, and I did not go home for holidays. I sent a card at Christmas for the first 2 years, then stopped. My mother called occasionally throughout my early 20s, birthday calls mostly brief and surface level, full of cheerful updates about neighbors I barely remembered and distant relatives whose names meant nothing to me. I answered some of them. Then fewer. Then none. By the time I was 26, my number had changed twice, I had moved to a different city entirely, and the life I had built belonged completely to me. A small apartment with good light. A job I was proud of. Friends who knew my history and loved me without requiring me to minimize it. Therapy, which taught me that what happened at that station was not a joke. It was abandonment. Calling it humor did not change what it was. I was 33 years old, sitting at my kitchen table on an ordinary Wednesday morning, drinking coffee and reviewing work emails, when my phone lit up with a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It called again. I ignored it again. By the time I picked up my phone properly and looked at the screen, I had 29 missed calls. Some from the unknown number. Some from a number I recognized immediately despite not having seen it in years, the way you recognize the smell of a house you grew up in even after a long time away. My mother's number. My father's number. And one from Daniel. 29 missed calls in the span of 2 hours. I sat very still for a long moment. My coffee had gone cold. Outside my window the city was doing what cities do, moving, breathing, indifferent. I thought about not calling back. I genuinely considered it. I had built something stable and I had worked hard for that stability, and I was not naive enough to think that 29 missed calls meant anything had fundamentally changed about who those people were. Desperation is not the same as transformation. Urgency is not the same as accountability. I called Daniel back first. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had been holding the phone. His voice was different than I remembered, older, quieter, with something heavy underneath it. He told me our father had suffered a serious heart attack 2 days earlier. He was in the hospital. He was stable, but the doctors were being careful. With their language in the way doctors are when they want to prepare families without making promises. My mother, Daniel said, had not slept in 40 hours. She was asking for me. Not asking the way people casually ask about someone they have not seen in a while. Asking the way people ask when they are finally, after a very long time, genuinely afraid of what their choices have cost them. I listened to everything Daniel said without interrupting. When he finished, there was a long silence between us. He did not fill it with justification or old excuses. He just waited. That silence told me more than anything he could have said. I told him I needed a few hours to think. I hung up and I sat with it, all of it. The station, the bench, the juice box, the spaghetti dinner that night, the years of small dismissals that followed, the birthday calls I stopped answering, the slow and necessary distance I had placed between myself and the people who had created me. I sat with the version of myself that was 7 years old and the version sitting in this kitchen at 33, and I tried to be honest about what I actually wanted. Not what I was supposed to want. Not the neat, forgiving ending that makes for a satisfying story. What I, Sophia Bennett, actually wanted. What I discovered, sitting there with my cold coffee, was complicated and does not fit into a single clean feeling. I was not ready to walk back into that family as if the past had been settled. I was not interested in performing reconciliation for an audience or providing comfort that had never been extended to me. But I was also not the kind of person who could learn that my father was in a hospital bed and simply stay home. Not because they deserved my presence, but because I deserved to look them in the eye as the woman I had become, the woman I had built entirely without them, the woman who had found her way home a long time ago, just not to their home. I booked a train ticket that afternoon. Not because they called. Not because of 29 missed calls or a hospital room or my mother's sleepless nights. I went because I had earned the right to close whatever chapter one chose to close on my own terms, in my own time. I went as Sophia Bennett, 33 years old, whole and clear-eyed, someone who had survived being left behind and had built something worth surviving for. The train ride was 2 hours. I watched the landscape change outside the window the way I had once watched city names on a departures board, small and hopeful and trusting. I was none of those things now. I was something better. I was someone who knew exactly where she was going and had chosen, freely, to go there. Whatever happened in that hospital room, that story belongs to me alone. And I was finally ready to tell it.